At dawn the ranch lay quiet as a held breath, the kind of quiet that presses on a man's ears until he listens to his own thoughts, and Caleb Hargreaves stood on the porch of his weather-beaten house with a tin mug cooling in his hands, watching the fog unravel itself from the cottonwoods like pale ghosts slipping away, telling himself it was just another morning in Red Hollow and not the morning everything would change, because ranchers survived by believing the land followed rules even when it didn't, and because Caleb had learned long ago that fear only grew if you fed it. Yet when the wind shifted and carried that sound, a low, wet moan that did not belong to any animal he knew, his spine tightened and his eyes drifted, unbidden, toward the ravine behind the barn where the old trail vanished into shadow, the place folks in town warned children never to wander near, the place his late father had once gripped his shoulder and whispered, "Don't look there," with a tremor that never left Caleb's memory, and now, despite himself, he stared, and in that stare the world narrowed, the fog thickened, and something in him froze like a creek in sudden winter. Because the sound came again, closer this time, not loud but deliberate, as if whatever made it knew he was listening, and Caleb's thoughts raced through years of drought and blood and bargains struck with the land, through the faces of men buried under simple stones, through the night he rode home wounded and swore he'd never doubt his senses again, and still his feet would not move, because the ravine had always been a line he would not cross, a place of old stories, of missing cattle found stacked like cordwood, of tracks that vanished mid-step, of a preacher who went down there to prove there was nothing to fear and came back gray-haired and silent, and as the fog thinned just enough for shapes to take form, Caleb saw the ground at the ravine's edge was torn, not by hooves or wheels but by something dragged. Something heavy that had scraped the rock clean, and his breath caught, for the land does not lie, and the land was telling him a truth he did not want, and then a voice spoke his name, not shouted, not whispered, but spoken as if from a throat too long and used, Caleb. And every story he had ever heard snapped into place like a loaded rifle, because voices that come from places like that do not bring good news. Yet habit and stubbornness warred with terror and he took a step, then another. Boots crunching on gravel that sounded too loud in the stillness, until he stood at the brink and saw, just beyond the reach of morning, the thing that made his muscles lock and his mind reel, for there, half hidden in shadow, was a man, or what had once been a man, his hat crushed, his coat torn, his eyes open and unseeing, and around him the earth bore marks like fingers pressed deep, too deep, into stone, and Caleb recognized the coat, recognized the men, recognized the debt he had never paid. Because it was Jonas Pike, the prospector who'd vanished weeks earlier after accusing someone in town of stealing his claim, the men who'd sworn he'd return with proof, and now proof lay here, silent and broken, and Caleb's heart hammered not just with fear but with guilt, because he had told Jonas not to go near the ravine, had repeated his father's warning with a half-smile, as if legends were just stories, and now the ravine had answered, and as Caleb knelt, against every instinct screaming at him not to, he saw something that chilled him deeper than the corpse, a symbol carved into the rock beside Jonas's body, a spiral cut with deliberate care, old and fresh at once, the same mark Caleb had found years ago on a fence post after a night of strange lights and restless horses, the same mark his father had burned from their brand iron without explanation, and as memory flooded back, Caleb realized this wasn't a single horror but a reckoning long delayed, because Red Hollow was built on ground taken and promises broken, on treaties ignored and graves unmarked, and the ravine was where those truths pooled, and when the wind rose and the fog tore open like a curtain, Caleb saw movement deeper down, slow and patient, not rushing because it did not need to, and a shape emerged, tall and bent, its outline wrong in ways that made the eye slide away, its presence bending the air so that the world around it seemed thinner, and Caleb understood then why men froze when they stared too long, because the thing was not a beast to be fought or a ghost to be fled but a mirror held up to the land's memory, and in that mirror were reflected the faces of those who had taken without asking, who had buried truth under progress and called it destiny, and the thing's gaze fixed on Caleb not with hunger but with expectation, as if asking what he would do now that he knew, and time stretched, and in that stretch Caleb made a choice, because freezing was death and running would only delay it, so he stood, lifted his hands to show he carried no weapon, and spoke the only honest words he had, telling the ravine he saw, telling it he remembered, telling it he would not look away anymore, and the thing listened, and in its listening the air warmed, the pressure eased, and though terror still lived in Caleb's bones, something else joined it, resolve, and when the thing retreated, not vanishing but withdrawing like a tide, leaving the ravine quiet once more, Caleb knew the price had been named, not paid. And that the town would soon feel it, because truths do not stay buried once unearthed, and as he covered Jonas with his coat and marked the place with stones, Caleb felt the weight of witness settle on him, a burden heavier than any saddle, and he carried it back up the path as the sun finally broke free of the hills, casting Red Hollow in honest light, and the day unfolded with the slow dread of a storm that everyone can smell but no one wants to acknowledge, because when Caleb rode into town, With news, faces tightened and doors closed, old men looked away, and a very few, nodded as if they had been waiting for this, and by nightfall whispers moved faster than horses, and the spiral mark appeared again, on a church door, on the jailhouse step, carved shallow but unmistakable, and fear spread, not wild panic but a focused unease, the kind that forces choices. And Caleb stood before the gathered townsfolk and told them what he had seen, told them about Jonas, about the ravine, about the warning handed down like a curse, and he did not soften the truth, because the land had not softened it for him, and some shouted him down while others listened with pale faces, and when the sheriff asked what he proposed, Caleb said the only thing that felt right, to make right what could be made right, to mark the graves forgotten, to return what was stolen where possible, to stop pretending the past was past. And the night stretched long as arguments burned and died, and outside, the wind carried another sound from the ravine, not a moan this time but a low note like approval or warning, and in that sound Caleb heard the future, hard and uncertain but real, and he knew that staring into the dark had nearly frozen him, but looking away would have ended them all, and as dawn crept in again, Red Hollow stood changed, not saved, not damned, but awake, and Caleb returned to his ranch with tired bones and a steadier heart, knowing the ravine would always be there, a line and a lesson, and that courage was not the absence of fear but the refusal to let fear decide. And if this story gripped you, if it made you feel the hush of the fog and the weight of that stare, then don't forget to buy the third night after Jonas Pike was laid to rest. Red Hollow no longer slept the way towns are meant to sleep, because silence now came in sharp pieces, broken by the creak of signs, the restless stamping of horses, and the way men paused mid-sentence whenever the wind slid down from the ravine, and Caleb Hargreave felt it most keenly on his ranch, where the land seemed to watch him back, testing whether his resolve would hold once fear had time to settle in, and as he sat alone by the lantern, cleaning a rifle he prayed he would not need, memories returned with cruel clarity, his father's warnings, the spiral burned from the brand, the nights when the cattle bunched together as if guarding against something unseen, and he realized the ravine had never been a boundary but a reckoning deferred, and now it was collecting its due, for just past midnight a rider came hard down the trail, dust-choked and wide-eyed, shouting that old Mrs. Calder's boy had gone missing near the creek, the same creek that fed into the ravine, and Caleb did not hesitate, because hesitation was how men lost more than they could afford, and he rode with a small posse under a moon thin as a knife, every hoofbeat echoing too loud in the dark, until they found the boy alive but frozen stiff beside the water, staring at a fresh spiral carved into a cottonwood, its sap still bleeding, and the boy could only whisper, "It told me not to look," over and over, and that was when the men understood this was no random terror but a warning moving outward, pressing the town to choose, and when they turned back they saw more marks along the trail, deliberate, patient, as if something ancient was walking the land and reminding it of old promises, and Caleb felt the weight of leadership settle heavier than any gun belt, because the ravine had spared them once, but mercy, like drought, never lasted forever, and as dawn broke red and unforgiving, Caleb knew the next choice would decide whether Red Hollow faced the truth together, or watched it rise from the shadows one soul at a time. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful Wild West stories where legend and truth collide, because every tale we share keeps these echoes alive, and the next one may be waiting just beyond the edge of what you dare.